So now we're on the second part of your day. We just finished pre-rounding. The next part of your day is going to be the actual rounding. And so for roundings, you always follow SOAP format. Do not deviate from this. You always want to follow SOAP format. And if you just stick to this, it really becomes a formula. And so I'm going to give you guys an example. So my subjective information, especially if we've been following this patient for like the third day, Mr. Hall, 67 years old, history of congestive heart failure with EF 50 to 55%, end-stage renal disease, cirrhosis. He presented for acute congestive heart failure exacerbation. We're currently treating him with Bumex 2 milligrams BID. He's tolerating it well, except yesterday we transitioned him to orals and it looks like his urine output has decreased. Overnight, he did have 6 beats. You always want to report overnight events. This is all your subjective, right? We're still in the S part of SOAP. Overnight, he did have 6 beats of VTAC. The night team had ordered routine labs and EKG. The magnesium was repleted. The EKG didn't have any changes. And then right after overnight events, how the patient symptomatically feels. You should always end and include in your subjective information how the patient symptomatically feels. He reports that his shortness of breath is better. He states he was finally able to lay flat yesterday. So I just did my subjective. Gave you all the information that you needed to know, including just relevant past medical history. Sometimes I don't even include that. I gave you why they were admitted really quickly, what we've done for them, what happened overnight, and how they're symptomatically feeling today. And that's my S. Then I go into objective, and this is also goes straight down always. Vitals, physical exam, labs, micro, imaging. That's how your objective should go. And if you do that every single time, your presentations will flow very nicely. So vitals, always give a 24-hour range, always have eyes and nose written down, especially if that's something you're carefully monitoring it. Physical exam, I always provide the physical exam to whatever system they presented with and that we've been monitoring. And then otherwise I'll say, and the rest of exam is unchanged, or the rest of the exam is unremarkable. And then labs, you're going to give your labs. I talked about how if anything's abnormal, you want to give them a trend and tell them how it compares to baseline. And then you want to give your microbio. If a blood culture is still pending or urine culture is still pending, you can say that. You can say, oh, and the urine culture is still pending, or, oh, the urine culture grew this and we're still pending speciation and sensitivities. And then finally talk about any imaging that you guys ordered. And then lastly, so we went over subjective, we went over objective, and the A and P are just the assessment and plan. And you really just need to present the 2 to 3 active problems. If they're just chronic problems, unless specifically asked, you should always be aware of every single problem and what you're doing for every single problem. But unless you're specifically asked, it's not something that you have to present on every day. So you don't have to say, for diabetes, we're doing this, or for high blood pressure, we're doing this. That should be handled between you and your senior. And your senior will notice if the sugars are too high or too low, and so will your attending, or if the blood pressure is uncontrolled. So you should always know and have a plan for sugar, blood pressure, any of their chronic problems. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to report them. And then when you're during the discussion, how I would do it is I would use that list of patients that I showed you, or either write it on top of the sheet that I used to present. I would write everything that we talked about that needed to be done with a checkbox near it. And so I didn't forget anything. So you are responsible for any orders that are talked about during rounds. And so to keep track of them, I used checkboxes to make sure that they were done. Always clarify the orders if they're not clear to you. If you don't know, ask, because it's worse not to ask at all. And then if a consult is not clear to you, or even if it is clear to you, you can always just really take a minute or two to tell your senior, hey, I'm about to call cardiology, and the question that I have for them is if they want to do any further risk stratification for this newly reduced ejection fraction. And just to make sure that you guys are all on the same page, right? Just briefly run it by them, because maybe your senior thought about something else that she wanted to talk to them about, or maybe that wasn't the right question that you guys wanted from that consult. And so now for the third part. So you saw your patient, you did your thing, you are rock stars, and you came up with your own plan. You talked about it with your senior. You rounded with the attending. The attending is super impressed because everything seems to flow. You came to rounds prepared. You've thought about everything that you've talked about in your presentation. And then finally, it's the after rounds OCDs. This is the third part of your day. And then these stand for the order that you should do things, like right after. Usually just take a minute. Most seniors do this where they'll run the list right after rounds to make sure nothing gets missed, right? And so place any orders that need to be placed right away. Those are number one, so that it gets done. Like, you want to get the orders in as early as possible in the day so they actually get done. Then the next priority is to call consults right away. You check who's on Am I On, and you call consults. And then the final thing is the discharges. So it's a nice way to remember OCDs. That's the order you should do things.